Harman Phoenix 200 has been out on medium format film for quite a few months now. But something that I failed to do in my original review was to load it into a 6x7 camera and shoot some portraits on it. So in today's video, we're gonna be looking at two different portrait shoots, one inside of the studio and one on location, where I shot Harman Phoenix 200 in a Mamiya RZ67 Pro II. On the second shoot, the location shoot, we've also got some comparison scans to look at, the lab scans from Come Through Lab, who are an amazing lab in Manchester who develop and scan pretty much all of my film, and then some home scans I did on the Epson V600, a flatbed scanner. I did some scans with Epson Scan, and I also did some Negative Lab Pro scans. So we can have a look at just how colours and the qualities of this film differ depending on the scanning process. But let's get into it. So being a 200 speed film, Harman Phoenix is actually kind of the perfect ISO for something like studio photography. As we probably know by now, Harman Phoenix performs a little bit better when it's overexposed opposed to rated at 200 or underexposed. And so we're gonna rate it at 100 for this studio shoot, which is quite a natural option, I think, for a film stock when you're shooting something in the studio with strobe lighting. In this example, we're gonna be shooting with 3 different lighting setups. So we're gonna use constant light, shooting with the Ulanzi V120C, which is a continuous light, and then a small softbox. And then we've got a strobe, which I think was the Bowen's X100 or something, I'll link it in the description, with a much larger softbox. And then we're also going to be shooting with natural light and just seeing, you know, how the photos differ with using Harman Phoenix 200. So first up, let's look at the constant light. Using the Ulanzi V-mount 120C, we set up a softbox just above Tanya, facing down towards her. So with constant light, you get less power than with strobe lighting, but there was still enough power with the Ulanzi V120C to be able to light this and meter it at 120. But what you can see, because we use this smaller softbox, is that there is this fall off of light around the edges of the image that gives you this kind of like green vignetting. This is because Harman Phoenix is very quick to go green when in the shadows or underexposed. So this fall off of light is quite obvious because of those shadows shifting to green. These next couple of photos are using a very similar setup, but with strobe lighting and a much bigger softbox. And because of this, we don't have that fall off on the edges, so you don't see that green shadow as much. However, you do still see this green shadow kind of around the edges of her hair. And something else that we can see is where the light is really hot in certain parts of her face, or in this image in particular on her shoulders, you can see that those highlights have been really blown out. These natural light photos, again, you can see pretty much the same thing with the strobe lighting, blown out highlights, green shadows. We kind of know this about Harman Phoenix anyway. It doesn't deal great with, you know, that latitude or with that dynamic range as other films, maybe like the Kodak series, but it is a very experimental film. We know this, it's like still in development. And I still think that from previous iterations and the 35mm iterations of this film, we still are seeing improvement already in terms of how it can deal with that kind of contrast between the dark and the light areas. I think that the contrasty nature of Harman Phoenix means that it lends itself to a very specific type of photography. And I think that you can really achieve this within studio photography. Maybe not particularly in these kind of images in the studio that I've shot, but maybe if you kind of go into it with the characteristics and the style of the film in mind, you can make something really interesting. So that's something I definitely want to move into with this film stock later on in the year, is testing it with kind of more style in the shoot to hopefully complement the characteristics of the film stock. So those contrasty colors, you know, that lack of dynamic range, essentially trying to kind of lean into that. Another thing I want to do is print this film stock. I've printed the 35mm version, but I want to print the 120 and see how that differs. So that'll be another video as well. But let's move on to the location photos. On this location shoot, I shot 2 rolls of film. I shot one Harman Phoenix 200, and the second roll was Kodak Gold 200. I rated both around 100 just for consistency, even though we know that Kodak Gold does perform better at 200 rather than being overexposed, whereas Harman performs better a little bit overexposed, so it's not an absolute fair test. But first up, let's have a look at Harman Phoenix and these couple of photos at the beginning of the roll that are a little bit underexposed. Again, I think the key takeaway from this is those muddy green shadows and how quickly that is able to shift. In the scans, I was able to offset that green quite a bit, and I think that the shadows are a lot more usable. But if you have a look at the photos taken with Kodak Gold, you'll notice how much more saturated and vibrant Phoenix is in comparison. And I actually think that I prefer the vibrancy in these reds and oranges on the Phoenix compared to the Gold. One of my biggest takeaways from Phoenix, from shooting it over the last however long it's been since they first announced Harman Phoenix, is how different it can look depending on the way it's scanned. So I did a video earlier on this year, I think it was, where I loaded Harman Phoenix 35mm into my Mamiya, and I scanned it at home and I scanned it in the lab. And that was the first time where I really saw what different results you could get depending on the scanning method, which is why in this video I wanted to show different scanning ways to try and show you what you can kind of get out of this film stock. So on the screen now you will see 3 different scans. On the left, a lab scan, in the middle a home scan using Epsom scan, and on the right a home scan using Negative Lab Pro. There are characteristics such as its contrast, the way that the shadows and highlights are recorded, that stay the same, but you can see so much variation in the way that the colours appear. And I think this much in the same way that you shoot it too, in terms of under and overexposure. I've got loads of videos on the channel about how Harman Phoenix performs differently depending on how you shoot it, whether you shoot it at 400, 200, 100, 160, whatever you want to shoot it at, and how those results differ. And I think that it being an experimental film that's still in development, you are going to see that lack of consistency, I guess, throughout the way that you shoot this film. Again, the colours on Harman Phoenix 200, they're not Kodak Gold, it's not Kodak Portrait, it's not that kind of realism that you might expect. You know, you can see this from the blues in his jeans to the reds in the colours. Those colours do kind of err on the side of being less realistic, more surrealistic, I guess. But I think, again, like I was saying with the studio shoot, that is something that's really fun. And if you could lean into that, then I think you could get some really interesting results. The way I see it is like Cinestill 800T, for example. There are certain shoots I wouldn't shoot that on because I don't want to have the characteristics of, you know, the white balance or the halation, etc. in certain shoots. And then there are other shoots where I think that really lends itself to that shoot. And because of that, I would opt to use that. And I think Harman Phoenix is very much the same kind of film stock at this point. Almost a novelty film stock in that way, that you would use it if you are really trying to generate those characteristics and lean into it. Then I think you're going to work on something really special. But if you're looking to do, I don't know, like an e-commerce shoot, and you're using Harman Phoenix, and you know the client hasn't specified that they really want like a strong style in those images, then it might not be the film stock for that kind of work. But all in all, I think that Harman Phoenix 200 is a really fun film stock to shoot. I like the experimental nature of it, and it's no secret that I think what Harman are doing for the film photography industry and what they're bringing to the market is actually really important in kind of longevity and creation and inspiring people to keep shooting film, keep creating film, keep engaging with film photography. Now that I've shot quite a lot of this film stock, I have a pretty good understanding of how it works. I want to kind of do something that really does lean into this film stock now. So that's what you can expect to see on the channel coming up shortly, is something that is taking these characteristics that are quite specific to Harman Phoenix and using those in a shoot to my advantage, I guess. But thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.